All right, welcome back to Gen 3 of Chris and Hamilton. Talk about...
Part 3.
Part 3? Gen 3? Oh, we just did Gen 3 night vision. We're doing Part 3 of our night hunting technology series. All right, so we're going to talk about when we only used thermal rifle scopes.
Okay.
What a game changer.
Game changer. And also, just like when you're building a rifle, just like when you're doing anything, there are things that you're going for, and then there's things that you should not go for, right? Like this, this build sitting right here, we got, a 7-inch barrel. I'm not going to be shooting 700 yards with this barrel. It's just not going to happen. With a lot of those thermal rifle scopes, what comes inherent in a lot of them is magnification. And close-up engagements, tough, but reaching out and kissing them from 100, 200 yards, incredible.
Yeah, and so we've used a mix of equipment. We've used the trijicon 4.5 power one. That's about my longest thermal kill was 250 yards with a 308.
It was sweet.
At Raccoon. It was awesome.
It was sweet.
It was sweet. It was a pretty good go. And then we've also used 2.5 power stuff. We use 3 power stuff. We are not thermal rifle scope experts, so you should probably, Jason Robinson.
We are enthusiastic amateurs.
We are enthusiastic. But let's talk a little bit about what the thermal technology gives you and how we've used it and what's been successful and not been successful.
Yeah. And that is to also say that we haven't experienced, I don't think, the full range of thermal technologies.
Yeah.
And so color profiles or magnifications or even... I think everything we've done were 640 sensors.
Yeah, because we're renting. So that's the other piece, is we don't own thermal yet. Close. We don't own thermal yet. So because we're renting, we choose to rent the 640 sensors, which are, at this time of making this video, are basically the industry top of the line.
Right.
I've used a 320 sensor and a binocular, and it wasn't any fun, so I stopped.
Yeah, and so given that we just came off of night vision, one of the biggest things you got to keep in mind on thermals is frame rates. And so there is not a perfect continuity of movement like you would get, and sometimes even auto gaining within those frame rates can cause you to, it's almost like a hiccup.
Describe what auto gaining is.
Yeah, so auto gaining is at any point you're going to have fluctuations in temperature readings in just what that sensor is picking up. And so say that my scope is pointed straight up into the sky. That thermal signature is going to be completely different from if I go from the sky and then come down onto a sounder of pigs. I'm going from no heat to heat. And just like the exposure, you can think of it on a camera, where if you go from a dark room to a light room, what that sensor is picking up is going to be different, and gain is sort of the thing that's done to equalize those differences, and that's not a thing that happens instantly, so you just have to account for it and know that it's best, auto gain is going to be most minimized with the least amount of movement on your scope.
Which means not driving around.
Yeah, which means not driving around.
Yeah. So for those who haven't used thermal, the way I would describe it is, imagine you're looking through a digital camera and you had 30 milliseconds of freeze frame.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way you experience it.
Right.
So with thermal, what you pick up is you can detect the things that are alive.
Yeah.
We've seen there's a bunch of different detection ranges that people will list. They'll say how far can you tell there's a person? How far can you tell there's a thing? How far can you tell that it's a specific species?
Yeah.
What's cool about thermal is if I scan a field under thermal and I see no, let's say white hot, I see no white things, there isn't any life there.
Yeah.
Or the life is completely covered up by something in the field, like a tree.
Yeah.
Right? But there is not life to eyes anywhere in that field. So you can you find yourself, once you use thermal, wishing you had thermal all the time.
Yeah.
It's because not using thermal is more like those hunting TV shows where you see them looking at binoculars and they're trying to inspect everything. With thermal, you're the thing that's bright hot, that's probably a person or a rock.
Right.
It's often a rock.
And even last night while we're sitting out, stationary with Gen 3 night vision, it would have been nice to have some thermal to be able to just do, because we still had a decent scan of the horizon. We probably had 400 yards of visibility in every direction before it rolled off. And so, just having something thermal for just a quick scan saying, okay, I see something over there. We're moving right to left, and so I totally, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
It's hard to not have it after having it.
Yeah. Now I will say I would say my two biggest downsides to thermal scopes is if you only have a thermal scope, you find yourself
Right, and it's mounted on a rifle.
Yeah. You find yourself lifting the rifle up and scanning the horizon, which doesn't sound like a pain in the butt, except for your rifles weigh 6 to 10 pounds.
Yeah, and if you're in the back of a car, you're in a side by side, like when it's just the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sweeping your side. I'm not going to be muzzling anybody here.
So you have to know where your entire party is before you use your optic to scan.
Yeah.
So that's the downside. Thermal also doesn't work through glass.
Yeah.
Which means when it is very cold, you have to take the side-by-side or a four-wheeler and be cold. Whereas if you had night vision or you're using white light, then you can be inside of a truck with the heat on. So that's a downside.
Yeah.
And then I would say the last downside, and maybe it's obvious, but maybe it's not. When we went out in a group where only one person had thermal, or only two of a group of people had thermal, it was very painful. I mean, it was possible, but it was very painful to shoot a big sounder of hogs.
Yeah, and so like equal. I think that we also tend to try to equalize experiences as much as possible, and so it's tough when like you just get to say, all right, you guys get the first shot. Because you have the thermals, and the other three of us are going to have to get sloppy seconds or something like that.
And go white light, which is better than not having buddies hunt.
Yeah,
it's more fun than not having thermal.
Yeah,
but
100%.
But it is a little frustrating to be the person who's not using the thermal, pointed in a direction, not being able to see anything.
Right.
Hear gunshots, and then turn on your white light, and then try and pick up a pig, then try and make a shot.
Yeah.
It's just it could be a little frustrating.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where, the thing is they're so expensive. That's the other bit.
Yeah.
They're so expensive. It's not like you can buy one and also buy one for your buddy, without the wife getting real sad.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that also one of the things that is worth mentioning is, especially in that spotter fashion, or when somebody's using thermal for spotting, depth perception.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very difficult. Just like a magnified, rifle optic, anything like that. It's like if you're moving around looking through a magnified rifle optic, like that depth perception can just get totally thrown off. And I have a bit of a reputation outside of that for seeing pigs that somehow turn into rabbits or raccoons by the time that we get there. And so
he thinks it's a pig really far away, and instead it's a rabbit not that far away.
Yeah, yeah. Or I've even seen a pig turn into a cow. It's so weird out here. So there's a learning curve to species identification, for sure.
Yep, and a lot of that, interestingly, is knowing what the animal does when it moves. Right. So
yeah, dynamics is completely
deer pick their head all the way up and take their head all the way down, and pigs don't have that range of motion. So even if you don't have the detail, noticing the thermal do this means it's probably not a pig.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I think that wraps it up. Name your thermal equipment that you think kind of makes sense.
Okay, so if it's me, maybe like an ideal setup.
Yes, for thermal rifle scopes only.
For thermal rifle scopes only, that's tough. It would probably be the trijicon mounted on the 308.
Okay.
And shooting off of sticks, because that's a big boy setup.
Yeah.
But it's also a big boy setup. That'll drop anything. That'll drop anything and everything.
That would be my stationary thermal.
Fair.
That'd be a stationary. Fair. For non-stationary thermal, I'd pick something in the 2.5 to 3 power range.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put it on the lightest gun I had.
Yeah.
The nice thing about shooting with thermals is that the equipment is you buy the thermal and you buy the mount.
Yeah.
And then you put it on a rifle that you own.
Right.
And so I think that was really effective.
Yeah.
Assuming you're doing just rifle scopes.
And I'd say that the very last thing is that we had a bit of a learning curve on zeroing as well.
Yeah. So you want to give some tips for zeroing?
I feel like heating up the aluminum foil was as close as we got, but like you might be.
So
might be better.
we've tried a couple. We tried heating up the aluminum foil. We tried putting aluminum foil in ice.
Yep.
We have tried using black targets on white paper, which actually works better than you think.
Yeah.
Especially if you have direct sunlight.
Yeah, doing it during the day.
Yep. I think the coolest way we've ever zeroed was Paul last year.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was he took a shot, nuked, which is basically that calibration that we were talking about.
Yeah,
he did a manual nuke, and he could see the hole. And then he moved the crosshairs to it because it's a digital moving, not a physical moving.
Right.
And I've not had a chance to replicate that on my own thermal rifle setups, but it worked for him.
And so, what would you say is your giving after part 1, part 2, part 3 here? What would you say is your ultimate setup for the style of hunting that we do out here?
I'll tell you in part 4.
Nice.
Okay, see you in part 4.